Hello, my name's Janice Godrich. I'm the President of PCS and welcome to our fourth Facebook Live event. I'm really pleased tonight that not only is Mark Serwotka, our General Secretary, here, but we've been joined by John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor. Comrades, this will last about 45 minutes and will cover the budget, the pay campaign, the compensation scheme negotiations and, of course, an update from John on the spring statement that's been happening today. We've had a lot of questions sent in, and just to let you know, it may not be possible to answer them all tonight, but we will answer all questions over the next few days directly. Can I ask people to share the event and to like the PCS page and to encourage people to join us tonight in terms of this event? Colleagues, before I start, I just wanted to ask Mark. Mark, is there an update on pay and the civil service compensation scheme that you'd like to give to members?
Yeah, thanks very much, Janice, and good evening to everyone. And I'm delighted as well that John's able to join us. We're hoping that John will be the Chancellor the next time we have a Facebook Live event. But it's good to have the opportunity to update people on the compensation scheme and on pay. And I know that many questions have been submitted on both. Firstly, on the compensation scheme, people will know that last year the union achieved a stunning victory, defeated the government in the High Court. And as a result of that victory, I'm pleased to report that we now have had many thousands of our members who have received considerable sums of compensation. We've seen cases where members have actually had compensation of £48,000 and £52,000 as a result of our legal victory. We have reinstated the 2010 redundancy terms. People who had their access to an early pension have been compensated. And as a result of what we did, we have not only seen money in our members' pockets, but we've seen a slowdown of many of the job cuts that the departments have planned. We're now in negotiations with the Cabinet Office, and I'm also pleased to tell people tonight that we've just received a letter that indicates the negotiations will carry on for at least a couple more months. And therefore, anyone worried that the government's about to change their compensation terms now because they may be considering departing, I'm pleased to be able to confirm there can be no change in those 2010 terms for at least another couple of months while the negotiations are in place. So I'm sure everybody will welcome that. That is a real stunning achievement. I mean, on the question of pay, Janice, on the back of last year's historic vote, the biggest turnout ever in a PCS ballot, we submitted in January a pay claim for a 5% pay rise for all PCS members. That is above the rate of inflation, to take account of not just inflation but the money that people have lost. Now, it was pretty, I think, unacceptable that the government didn't even acknowledge that pay claim for a number of weeks. So last week, Janice, you and I and John and 40 MPs were in this place highlighting how outrageous that was a way to treat you by the government. Well, I'm now pleased to tell you, since that event, the government wrote to us yesterday to say there will now be a meeting between Cabinet Office and Treasury officials to discuss our national pay claim. So that is a good step forward. But what I really wanted to stress in this sort of catch-up is that when we meet them to discuss our pay claim, it is really important that they understand that we are serious about being prepared to do what is necessary to get you above the rate of inflation. So we're asking all of our members and all of our representatives to ensure that we are ballot ready, that we are able to win any statutory ballot that the NEC believes is required to get the government to serious negotiations to give us above the rate of inflation. So it's good news they're meeting us, but let's ensure now in every workplace they see our members signing petitions, wearing our stickers, and making it clear that this must be the year when the cut to your living standards ends and we get above the rate of inflation.
Okay, thanks Mark, and clearly I would like to also add my thanks to all those reps and members who worked hard to get that result, and clearly we'd be interested in your questions and ideas about how to build in our branches should a ballot be necessary. John, it's clearly been a busy day for you today with the spring statement. Can you tell us how that will affect government departments and PCS members?
Okay. Let's explain what the spring statement was. It wasn't a budget, it was a spring statement. But we, from the Labour Party, we were calling for the spring statement to be what's described as a fiscal event, a real budget. Because in the November budget, it was almost a non-event. And the government never brought forward any proposals about tackling some of the issues that we're confronting in our public services, and never did anything about Well, tackling the unfair tax system. The only thing that came out of the last budget was enacted in the Finance Act 2 weeks ago, and that was to cut the levy on the bankers. So in other words, he gave a tax reward to the bankers, up to about 5 billion over the next few years. It was scandalous, really. We agree that there should only be one budget a year, but we said, well, the last budget was such a non-event, he should be doing something now. And we were trying to point out, really, the problems that are facing across all public services, the crisis that there is in our public services, and that people couldn't wait until November. They can't wait till the next budget. They can't wait till the next financial year. And I just asked the question at the beginning of the debate, has Philip Hammond listened to any doctors, nurses, professionals, teachers, police officers, any civil servant? Has he listened to anybody? Because the demand from them is not to wait until November to tackle some of these problems, but to act now. I raised the issue of the pay cap in general terms because in his speech today he made reference to the potential settlement that there is for the NHS workers, and again just raised that, well, we'll see what comes out of that. But any shift that the government's having on the pay cap for anyone is as a result of trade union campaigning that's taken place over the last couple of years, and with the support of the Labour Party. And as Mark said, we had the meeting in Parliament only a couple of weeks ago. All that pressure now is beginning to push even this government back, and they realise they've got to do something about public sector pay. The other thing that happened today was before the spring statement, you have the publication of the Office of Budget Responsibilities projections for the economy. And what's really interesting, is that Hammond was boasting as though pay was being, Chancellor Exchequer was boasting as though pay was uplifting in some way. And what the OBR said, basically, it's still going to be subdued over the next 2 to 3 years. And the only real lift in pay is coming from the public sector campaigns that we're waging, where we're forcing them to break the pay cap. The other issue, the issues that came up today was we were just pointing out in every public service, what the Chancellor's boasting is that he's reduced the deficit, he's tackling debt. And we had to point out to him, well, it might be tackling debt, but this government has introduced £700 billion of additional debt. And on the deficit, well, they did promise us that they were going to wipe the deficit out completely by 2015. So 3 years later, they still haven't done it. But also, we're saying, actually, you haven't reduced the deficit. All you've done is you've shifted it onto the shoulders of others. So you've shifted it onto the shoulders of NHS managers. The NHS trusts are going to have £1 billion worth of deficit by the end of this financial year. You've shifted it onto the shoulders of local councillors, because we've now got Conservative councils going bust. And we've got them running out of their reserves. National Audit Office demonstrated that. We've got a large number of councils now running out of reserves, running out of the ability to draw upon those reserves to protect services. And I just went through a whole range of services where things were in a perilous state, and we got nothing in return. And in fact, it's difficult to me to be objective on this, but I've looked at the coverage since then. The word that's being used the most about the Chancellor is that we said complacent, others have said smug. So we got nothing today, really, by way of commitment. He's going to launch another range of consultations about, pardon the pun, he's recycling, this issue about recycling, a consultation about recycling, a whole range of things like that. So it's another round of consultations. I think in the last budget there were 20 consultations that were launched, never come to any fruition. So today was a bit of a political stunt for them. But the debate was heated. It was extremely heated because you had individual MPs getting up saying what's happening in their constituencies, what's happening with regard to the closures of children's centres. 400 women last. I'll just give an example. 400 women last year turning up at women's refuges. So in other words, as a result of domestic violence, almost certainly, turned away, couldn't find a place. We've got the highest number of children coming into care since the 1980s. Why? Because there's been cuts to intervention, children's services where you intervene to support that. So MP after MP was getting up saying, this is what's happening in my constituency, this is the perilous state of our public services as a result of 8 years of austerity, now's the time to end it. He refused to allocate any further additional money, so now we run our campaign up until the November budget. But the tragedy of all of this is that people can't wait till November. You know, how many more people have to die waiting for an ambulance before this man will act? How many more councils have to go bust? How many more people have to live in poverty wages before they actually act? So there was a lot of anger in the chamber today, and I could completely understandable as well.
Thank you. John, I know that you've been a long-time supporter of the PCS National Pay Campaign, and we'll get some questions in about what we need to do if we move to that next stage of our campaign. But before I ask Mark to deal with some of those, what would you do in government to improve the pay of public sector workers?
Well, I think we've said straight up forward we're going to scrap the pay cap. Yeah, we'd get back into realistic negotiations with the unions to make sure not just that they keep pace with inflation, but also that they tackle some of the money that they've lost over the years. What's happened? We've made it clear about that. But the best way of protecting people's wages, we're going to introduce a real living wage, £10 an hour. But the best way of protecting wages is to join a trade union. And the best way of ensuring that you have a healthy trade union movement is to make sure you have legislation that enables them effectively to negotiate. So if you look at Labour's manifesto for the last election, we said we'd bring forward, establish a Ministry for Employment. That's what's happened in the past. That Ministry for Employment will ensure that there's proper, free, collective bargaining in this country, restore trade union rights, scrap the Trade Union Act that the Tories introduced specifically to undermine trade unionism in this country, scrap that and have a Ministry of Employment that will not just allow free collective bargaining coming back again, but also will regulate the sectors as well to make sure people are treated fairly. On that way, we get, first of all, decent wages, but we also you give people the right to protect their standard of living too. The Tories are terrified of this, absolutely terrified of it completely, and you can see why, because, well, as demonstrated in the last budget. At the moment, we've always said austerity is not an economic necessity, it's a political choice. They made a political choice, both the last budget and today as well. They're happy to give tax giveaways to the super rich, the corporations and the bankers, and at the same time we have to pay for that. And we pay for that by basically increased taxes, cuts in public services, and the restraint upon ordinary workers' wages, basically. We've got to end that. One way of ending that is to make sure people have trade union rights back in this country, and that's what we'll do.
Mark, I'm sure you agree that after years of campaigning on those issues, it's really refreshing to hear a Shadow Chancellor talking about the positive things, many of which is PCS policy that we would hope to see in the next government. But of course, in the here and now, we need to put pressure in order to try and resolve some of these issues. We've had a few questions from people about the prospects, for example, of coordinated action with other unions in relation to pay, and also about the policy in Scotland about how that affects our campaign. So would you like to pick up some of those points? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, we opened up by reminding people that on the compensation scheme we'd achieved a stunning victory, because it's very likely that in order to get justice on pay this year, that we're going to have to also show the government that we're serious. It is great to have John here, and John has supported us for many years. And I think it's also worth reminding people that Jeremy Corbyn came to our conference not so long back and said that a Labour government would reintroduce national pay bargaining in the civil service to ensure that we can get just rises for everybody and not have one department played off against another. So it would be fantastic if we could have negotiations with a new sort of cabinet minister, a new chancellor, a new prime minister who actually care about our members, and I know John has shown that and Jeremy has shown that. But you're right, we want there to be a general election, but we can't decide when that's going to be, so we have to be prepared to fight now. When we submitted our pay claim to the government, we did it because you, our members, gave us the biggest mandate we'd ever had. Nearly 50% voted, 99% said they wanted above inflation pay rise, and 80% said that they were prepared to take industrial action. So we submitted that claim to the government for £10 an hour, 5%, and for a return to national pay talks. Now, as I said earlier, they've now agreed to meet us. But this is a critical point, because my guess is they're going to try to meet us to tell us why all the things we're asking for are unrealistic. So when we meet them, we want them to know, in every department, in every public sector employer, we've got PCS members, that people are active, that they're getting involved in our pay campaign, that the government understand that the vote you did last year was a serious reminder to them that they ignore us at our peril. And that's why we have always believed that if more public sector unions take action together, that's the best chance of actually winning. But we've also understood that other unions, and we know the health unions are clearly in discussions about health service pay, Local government unions have just finished balloting on pay in local councils. But those unions' members will decide what it is they're going to do. If they want to fight on pay, we absolutely want to have a joint campaign with them. But we also recognise as PCS that if other unions do decide something differently, we have to ensure that we're campaigning for our members' pay. And I think the key thing, therefore, to get across is this is the year where we think we can actually make real advances on pay. And that's why in the coming weeks, we're urging you to recruit people in your office if they're not members of the union, attend any meetings, get involved in all of our events. We'll keep you informed of what we're doing. But remember this, that if we have to hold a statutory ballot on the question of pay, we have to get more than a 50% turnout. We think we can do that, but you're the ones who will make that happen. And if we do get such a vote, I think with this government being in the state it's in, we can indeed get a better pay rise. And that's why the question of Scotland is important, because the Scottish Government has made it clear that in Scotland, our members earning less than £36,000 a year will get at least a 3% pay rise. There will be 2% for those people earning more than that. And I think we have to say that if in Scotland the government there has been able to table an offer way better than the 1% we've had in the past, all civil servants and PCS members throughout the UK should be able to get that and better than that. And that's why we want this to be a united campaign to get above the rate of inflation for our members wherever they work.
Thanks, Mark. Gareth has messaged in saying the UCU, who we know are currently in dispute, are leading the way in terms of winning a statutory ballot and taking that action. And I'm sure that we here would all want to send solidarity greetings to them in the dispute that's taking place at the moment. Before we move off onto maybe some questions about jobs and privatisation, just one question from Sean, John, which I'm sure is something you get asked quite a while. How can MPs, and mostly opposition MPs, government MPs, continue to support the pay cap when their own salaries have been increased year by year? What's your view on that?
Exactly, there's hypocrisy, isn't it? Absolute hypocrisy. And it's interesting, isn't it? We're now in a situation where every public sector worker I meet now, and many of them show me their pay slips. This is what I earn at the moment, and this is how much I've lost. So I've met local government workers. They've lost, since 2010, 21% pay cut. You meet the nurses and others, 14, 15%. That's it. Some of your own members, you've fought hard to maintain their living standards and all the rest, but there's been a squeeze year in, year out. But the only squeeze that hasn't occurred has been in Parliament. And it's just remarkable. And also, I think Mark will remember, I made a comment when we had a debate around a PCS issue some years ago, and it was this. I sit opposite large numbers of Tory MPs who are incredibly wealthy people, and some people are born into wealth, and you can't blame a person for where they're born or what family they're born into. But I said then that anyone who's fairly wealthy, or anyone who's on an MP salary, a really good salary, when they're talking about the pay or the conditions of people earning less than them, poorer than them, they need to take a chastening view and very significant care. And that hasn't been the case. Some of the debates we've had in Parliament around poverty and levels of pay has been brutal, to be honest. I don't think people are willing to tolerate that anymore. And I think the pressure that's mounting on Conservative backbenchers in particular means that we're able to secure victories on lifting the pay cap. The Tories wouldn't have said they're going to scrap the pay cap, even though in many instances they haven't. Even though using that expression was forced upon them by trade union campaigning, and also I have to say the shock we gave them, the Labour Party gave them in the last general election too. So we've got to turn that scrapping the pay cap into a reality. And I've said time and time again, the lobbying that we do as a union on individual MPs and as the PCS parliamentary group has been effective over the years and is increasingly effective. I don't know, you made the point, I don't know when the next general election has come. I think the Conservatives will cling on to office for as long as possible. They're not really in power because they're so divided, but they'll cling on for as long as possible. So what we've got to do is recognise that and put all the demands upon them now to act and divide them, because there'll be a number of Tory MPs that we think we can put sufficient pressure on from our campaigns that will then be saying to Theresa May and others, the only way I'm going to save my seat is if you start giving out some decent pay awards to public sector workers. So in that way, I think the campaigning we do is absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just one thing I just wanted to add, Janice, before we move off the question of pay, which is we've talked about how our members deserve above the rate of inflation, and we've said we're determined to get it. But what I think is significant to tell and repeat this message tonight is what's important about today is today was the spring statement. The Chancellor, Philip Hammond, had the opportunity to tell the people of this country what he was going to do differently, and he didn't do that. And why this is important for us is that we know if we need a pay rise above inflation, and we're going to get it, he must put money into the public sector. And it is important to remind people that we want 5%, but we want funding to go into the public sector, because what we're not interested in is a 5% pay rise on the one hand, and then loads of job cuts and office closures in order to pay for it. And that's why I think it's important that John's here tonight, because I think John has understood as Shadow Chancellor that these things can't be magicked up. You need funding to be put in and investment into the public services, and that is our campaign. It is for funded pay rises above inflation, and that's what we hope everybody will support in the coming weeks.
Thanks very much. We've got a couple of questions on privatisation. I know a key issue for many of our members. Before we take the detailed question, our executive last week discussed the impact of the collapse of Carillion, not only on members who work in government departments, but the members that we represent who work for Carillion as well. Mark, do you want to tell us a bit about the background of what we're doing on that and trying to deal with the impacts of that on those members?
Yeah, and I think Carillion is a really clear example of the failures of the private sector and why these years of privatisation have not been in the interest of British people and for the services that they receive. And we saw with the award of contracts to Carillion, when the government knew there were profit warnings, I actually think is an abuse of taxpayers' money, and it is abuse of people who rely on services. And so we are now dealing with the consequences. We have members who were employed by Carillion, and we are part of the TUC group that is trying now to not just look after people in the here and now, but crucially revisit those arguments that were had over the last 20 years to ask ourselves, why are the Conservatives so obsessed with putting all of this in the private sector when actually the public sector has a brilliant track record based on prioritising services to people and not worrying about profits. And to that end, we do intend now with the TUC to revamp a private anti-privatisation campaign, and I'm happy to report that in looking after our members' interests, I will next week be doing a rally at the British Museum where we actually have members who worked for Carillion who now want to be put back in-house to be employed by the British Museum, who are not being allowed to do so. And we will be there talking to those members, but actually sending a wider signal, I think. These are people who want to go to work and provide a service. When the market fails and a big company fails, these are people who still have mortgages to pay, rents to pay, and kids to feed. We're determined to get them jobs on decent terms and conditions and back in the public sector, and that's where we will be campaigning alongside the TUC, starting at the British Museum next week. Excellent.
John, Carillion, does it not show that privatisation of public services is recklessly out of control? What would a Labour government do, both in terms of protecting the services and the impact on the individuals in those areas?
Yeah, okay, I'm hoping to get along to the British Museum next week as well. Excellent. As I can. If I can't, there'll be someone from our team to come along. Let's go through the history of this. Jeremy Corbyn and I opposed PFIs, private finance initiatives, public-private partnerships from when they were first introduced, and have done consistently. And people think, oh, this is ideological. No, it isn't. It's absolutely pragmatic. And the reason it's a pragmatic opposition to these proposals is because, as we've seen in Carillion, the idea is that somehow these PFI deals would generate all this additional income, there would be no risk whatsoever, it would always fall on the private sector, and they'd always be more efficient. That whole philosophy now has been proven to be just untrue. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are misled or forced into going down that PFI route. What we've said very clearly is, first of all, under Labour there'll be no more PFIs. That's it. finished. We're not going to sign any more. That'll be it. The second thing is that what we're doing now is we want to bring them back in-house, because we believe there should always be an in-house preference anyway when a service is undertaken, if it's a new service being brought about. But also those PFIs that have taken place some of them have been scandalous. You know, the bells are going off because Parliament's just come to an end. It's not a fire alarm. Okay. Some of these have been absolutely scandalous, and this isn't me saying this. The National Audit Office have brought forward their figures to the analysis of PFIs. You know, something like 70% profit rate on one of the schemes that was done for a hospital, 40% on schools, that sort of thing. And what happens is they set up a vehicle. That vehicle is about 10% of equity, and then the rest of it then is largely loans. So what we're saying is, for those, we're going to go through every PFI contract. We'll bring into public ownership the vehicle, and then we'll renegotiate the loans. On the London Underground, when the public-private partnership collapsed there, it was brought back in-house, and they saved 470 million on the renegotiation of that particular contract and the debts themselves. We believe we can make a saving overall. The figures at the moment are astronomical. Over the next 25 years, £200 billion worth being paid out on these schemes. And it's interesting. One, these companies everyone thought were too big to fail. Well, Carillion demonstrated they can. And then secondly, a lot of the money that taxpayers are paying to pay for these schemes is going to companies and then straight onto tax havens. So they don't even pay their taxes. It's been a rip-off, I think, from the beginning. And we'll end it and we'll bring it back. It's important that the staff involved in these schemes are protected in the interim as well. So when Carillion, the crisis occurred, we put together a working group within the Labour Party, working with the trade unions, to work through how we could do the maximum protection for the workers themselves. And we said to government then, these workers should be brought back in-house into whether the NHS, local government, or whatever that scheme was, or central government civil service. And we'll keep the pressure on that all the way through. But it's been a scandal. I have to say also, Carillion was a blacklisting company. Had to pay compensation out as well. No blacklisting company will ever get a contract under a Labour government.
Do you want to just let people know what we mean by blacklisting? Because I know there's we've tried to get that awareness.
Get the message across. Well, basically, it's a traditional method that's been used by employers for over a century, where they identify someone who they do not wish to employ because they're either trade union rep, or if they're not a trade union rep, health and safety rep or something like that. Someone who they think will somehow give them trouble. We set up the Blacklisted Workers Group. I helped set it up in Parliament itself. And when you say, why did they give them trouble? These were trade unions that were just representing their members. Well, it was interesting, on the building sites, there was a large numbers of trade union members who were the health and safety reps who were actually saying this is dangerous, people could die here. And then they get blacklisted. And the employers had an association called the Consulting Association, compile lists of names, about 4,000 names, of workers that they would then circulate around other companies to say, these are the people you shouldn't employ because they've got a trade union background. A lot of people lost their livelihoods as a result of that. It destroyed people's lives. It was scandalous. We've exposed it. There's been some compensation given, but we included in our manifesto commitments that we'd have an inquiry into blacklisting, because we don't think actually there's been the full exposure that needs to happen. As I say, people's lives were damaged severely by this, and we'll continue to campaign on that basis. But these companies now that have a record of blacklisting, we don't see why we should be using taxpayers' money to give them public contracts that they can then use to exploit their workers.
It's clearly very blatant in those industries, but in PCS we've also had attacks on our union, haven't we? And it might be good just to, Mark, if you could update people on how we managed to deal with those. Yeah,
I think it is worth reminding people that the points that John made has happened in government, and indeed we've had people who have been victimised for standing up, being union reps. We deal with private employers now who have taken civil service work and then they won't even sit down and talk to the union or recognise the union. And it wasn't so long ago actually that our second biggest government department, HMRC, we found a leaked document where they had a strategy to try and sort of undermine the union in order to undermine their members' terms and conditions. And of course that is about weakening the union. So we've seen a lot of this in the public sector as well as in the private sector. I think the thing that I'd like to stress is that on the back of Carillion, a lot of people were saying, well, this shows privatisation doesn't work, but it doesn't show that to the government. It does show it to the government, but they're ignoring it because they are ideological about it. And of course, we all saw on the same day that the government had to renationalise the East Coast Railway because it was failing in the private sector. They awarded contracts to some of the same companies in the Northwest. And it goes to show that the government will carry on playing fast and loose. And it really is up to us, I think, to make it quite clear that in public services in particular, they should not be about private profit, they should be about the people that we serve. And the British Museum we've already mentioned, but there are other examples that what government departments should do is bring the work back in-house. But there's evidence they are stalling, they're taking their time, they're trying to line up other private companies or create GovCos, government companies. And what would be the straightforward answer is to learn the real lessons and bring it back into the civil service and the public sector, where our members can do the job that they do best, rather than worrying about shareholders, and that's what we're determined to fight for.
And a question here, sort of related to that, from Caroline, who I think works for HMRC. How has the government found money, or how does the government find money for building and property deals like the HMRC regional centres when they've no money for staff or pay?
Exactly. What we want to do, it's going to take a lot of effort, and PCS will help us, I'm hoping. We want to do a review of the existing government's budget line by line, because some of the decisions that have been made, I think without properly consulting the people who know, i.e. the workers who are at the front line, some of the decisions have been made, I think have been extremely wasteful. And we've seen property services and things like that, buildings taken over that are not used eventually. We saw that with the regional fire centres that were set up as well, and the regional control centres, and some of those contracts, they're paying out for buildings that are standing empty. Again, on that line-by-line review, we want to work with PCS to do that, and do that across all departments. And in that way, we have a reputation of being able to manage services better than the private sector. Why? Because the workers who undertake those, so deliver the services, know it better than anybody else. And when it comes down to actually managing individual services and manage those budgets, who better to ask than the person who's actually delivering it and knows how that service should be delivered, rather than what's been a record under this government and past governments as well, unfortunately, the bringing in of consultants who again do a review, take a large amount of money out, and the amount spent on consultants by this government in particular is absolutely staggering, and then deliver what effectively is a cuts exercise.
Mark, I mean, I think we'd welcome that. We've won 2 court cases in DWP and against the compensation scheme where the government, at a high cost to the taxpayer, defended those decisions which turned out to be overturned in court. So I think we certainly would want to be supportive of that approach.
Yeah, I mean, we have won in the High Court 5 times against the government now in the last few years, and it's millions of pounds worth of taxpayers' money. But what I wanted to say briefly about the question that you asked earlier on is that we're a union, and we're a union that represents hard-working women and men who deliver frontline services, and many of them will be watching this. And all I think you can take from what the government and our departments are doing is that they're telling us they do not care about people. They don't care about staff, and they don't care about the public that they serve. And that's why, to answer the question directly, they can find the money to build super regional centres, because all they care about is saying we're going to pay a bit of money now because we're going to try and save money in the long term because we don't care about people. And I think that is tragic, because I have met personally, I went sort of back end of last year to Stockton, where we had a rally in Stockton on a Saturday, supported by 5 of John's parliamentary colleagues and our local reps, to make the case to keep the tax office open in Stockton. And I met someone who had been 30 years in HMRC, who was being faced with a choice that she wanted to keep her job, and the public got to keep her expertise, because she was an expert in tax. Then she was faced with 3 hours commuting a day to get to work. It was impossible. So she was going to leave to take a job in a local supermarket. I've got nothing against supermarkets, but it is a tragedy when somebody with 30 years experience we're losing that person because the government don't care about them. We're seeing this in job centres that are closing, tax offices, and in tax offices, if you live in Devon or Cornwall or Dorset, there will be no HMRC presence. And I think what we should remind ourselves of is that in the 1950s, there was a consensus in Britain that public sector jobs could be put into parts of the country that the market would never create enough work. And that's why we've got civil service presence in Scotland, the North East, in South Wales, in Devon and Cornwall. And this government is breaking that consensus, and it is saying we don't care about local communities, we don't care about public services, we are shutting them down. And that to me is the difference between unions who care for people in the communities and our members, and what John is talking about the importance of public service, and a government that sees everything as just a balance sheet and cares nothing about people. And that's what we've got to stand up against.
HMRC has been a classic example, hasn't it? We did the review of HMRC, which we had an input into, which Professor Prem Seeker advised us on. And again, you have a department an agency, where they've cut the staff in half, dramatically, tens of thousands of jobs going, closed local offices, and then they're worried why, they then are concerned about they're not collecting enough tax. It's not rocket science, is it? You need tax collectors to collect tax. And the issue around the local offices, where, again, I spoke to lots of small businesses. We work with the Federation of Small Businesses, so I speak to lots of businesses. They had a local office they could go into, take advice from, and as a result of that, they would pay their appropriate level of tax. But in addition to that, the local office picked up large amount of local intelligence. So there it was ensured they could ensure that the appropriate level of taxes were paid and there'd be enforcement, etc. If you lose all that local intelligence, you lose that historic expertise over time. And that's what's happened with HMRC. Of course you're going to have a crisis around tax evasion, tax avoidance. And HMRC management has been a problem for a number of years, but in recent years the brutality of the scale of cuts has been ridiculous. And I think that, again, what we've said in the review that we did, we'll be working with PCS to make sure this critical agency is properly resourced. In addition to that, it's a saving rather than a cost, because if you can have a properly resourced HMRC, you'll be able to resolve the tax gap. When the government admits themselves it's 34 billion, others think it's anything up to 120 billion. I think it's most probably somewhere around 60 or 70 billion. That could pay for our health service.
We're really pleased with the work we've done alongside John, you in opposition and before on the issue of tax avoidance and tax evasion, and we've got a specific message from Phil in HMRC who says that we're more than happy to help you, John, in that work. So I think that's really really helpful.
Well, one of the issues that came out of the review, thanks to PCS's discussions, was about the structure of HMRC itself, how it's managed, how it operates, the advisory groups. And I thought what was really interesting, what came out of that, which even I hadn't fully understood, is that on the advisory groups that took place, advising the government on tax reliefs, were the auditors and the accountants advising the very companies who were claiming those tax reliefs.
Absolutely.
And just the exposure of that demonstrates, I think, just what major reform needs to take place. And who better to guide that reform than the people doing the job?
Absolutely. We're coming into the last 5 minutes of this Facebook Live event, and I've got two more questions, one for Mark and then one for both Mark and John. Mark, we're getting a lot of questions about the statutory ballot and about winning a statutory ballot, and I think the basic question is, can we win? So it might be, I think, appropriate to talk about some of the work that we're doing to ensure if that proves necessary. Yeah.
Well, we can win,
yep.
And actually we've got to win because we are not expecting after today, where the government hasn't put any money into the public sector, that the government's suddenly going to give us the pay demand that we have rightly put on our members' behalf. So the NEC, when it met last week, believed that we are going to have a statutory ballot. So what I can say to members who are watching tonight and activists is we've now got a very detailed programme of action that's going to take place. We're going to be contacting every branch. We're making sure that in every branch we can start by ensuring all our data is up to date. We know that we are trying to recruit non-members. We're trying to get more activists for the union. We want to ensure that if it comes to the ballot, that we are confident that more than half of our members will vote and will vote yes. And the best way to do that, I think, now has to be that we have meetings, that we do petitions, that we wear our stickers, that the management in all of these offices feeds the message up that PCS members are serious about pay. And that's why my message tonight is we've got to be ready in the coming weeks, that if that ballot happens, that we can and will win. I would also say that as part of that, let me reassure people that we've looked very closely at the consultative ballot we won last year. We know where we did well, where we need to do a bit of extra work. We'll be putting extra resources in. But just remember this really, if Philip Hammond today says no more extra money, we know that if we don't get above the rate of inflation, it's a cut in your living standards, then he has to realise we mean business. So when it comes to this vote, we can win and we are determined to win, and make sure that's the message that we spread in all of our offices.
Thank you, Mark, and you'll certainly be hearing more from the union about that over the next period. Just time for one final question, and it's a question from a member called Dave. He says, John, what do you think about the Chancellor making jokes in Parliament when this government has caused a return to poverty illnesses like rickets in this country?
Well, I don't mind a bit of wit in any debate, but today was brutal, absolutely brutal. I reminded them, 5,000 of our fellow citizens sleeping rough tonight. Within steps of the House of Commons entrance, a homeless person died a month ago. We're talking about a scandalous situation in our country at the moment, and the way in which the Chancellor approached it today was not wit. It was an arrogance, and I think that came out, really came out an arrogance. It just demonstrated to me, I say complacency, but also just how cut off they are from the real world. And then we went on to a vote this afternoon where the rollout of free school dinners excluded effectively 1 million children. So 1 million children, as a result of that vote today, will not get the free school meal that should have been planned for them. It's just brutal. It shows you just how cut off they are, but how they don't care either. And you can have cross-party disagreements, and you can have a bit of banter and a bit of wit, etc. But today I thought it was a grotesque display. It really was.
Thank you. Mark, any comments on that, and any final words to the PCS members who are joining us tonight?
Well, I would accept, I entirely echo what John has said, that to make jokes when people are really suffering is, I think, despicable. But I'd also make the point that I met Philip Hammond myself not so long back, and he just doesn't get it. I mean, he despite all the evidence we've given him, had the cheek to tell me that actually we were not badly paid and we were still doing well with the private sector, and he just listens. And it is that sort of arrogance that makes you think they don't really care. And we do care. Our members care about the public they serve, and our members care about their families and their communities, which is why this is such an important stuff for us. And I just really want to finish by saying that what I think hopefully people have got, our members and our reps tonight, is that as a union we are determined to do whatever we can to right some of these injustices. The compensation scheme shows we can win, even when lots of people say winning isn't possible. We won a stunning victory last year, and now we've got to defend it. We can also win on pay, and the secret to that is a strong union, lots of members getting involved, more reps, and being active in every workplace. And if we do that, we provide such important services that we do have the power to force the government to treat people properly. And that's why in the here and now for us that is really the key. But the other significant thing, I think, and why we are so delighted that John has come, is there's been a cynicism about politics in Britain, I think, over the last 20 years, where people said they're all the same and nobody cares. And I think it's really great to be here tonight to know that if we do have a strike on pay, if we do campaign to keep offices open, we actually have got, with John and Jeremy Corbyn, people who will get up at the dispatch box and they will support us because they agree with what we're doing. And I think that is why this is quite an exciting moment. Our job as a union is to campaign now and to fight in the here and now, but it's to also recognise that if John was the Chancellor and Jeremy Corbyn was the Prime Minister, we would be having these proper discussions about civil service pay, industrial relations, and that would transform, I think, our members' lives. And I think that's why we should be hopeful. We should be hopeful that we've now got politicians who care, and they're here tonight to demonstrating that. But we should also be hopeful that our union, having faced savage attacks for years, has come through it. We're now beginning to win. Now we want to build and grow. And let's make sure that we remember that 2018 was the year when you finally got money in your pocket that was better than the rate of inflation. The best way to do that is build a union, let's campaign, let's work with people like John to ensure we have strong public services, decent pay where our members are valued. We're determined to fight for that, Janice, and we hope that everybody who's watching tonight will share those values and build our campaign.
Well, thank you, Mark. We're slightly over time, so I'm going to conclude this Facebook Live event now. Can I thank John, a credible busy day, for the Shadow Chancellor to take time out on the day of the Spring Statement and come and do this. It's really appreciated, and thank you so much for coming along and participating. Can I thank Richard Law, our signer, who's on his third event now, so he's getting used to the speed of my colleagues' contributions. And can I thank all the support and technical staff from PCS who've made this event possible tonight. And of course, Mark, for taking time out to come along here as well. Two final things. Can you please remember to try and attend the TUC demo on the 12th of May, a new deal for workers. PCS will be mobilising for that event, and it's a good opportunity to ensure that we publicise our pay campaign and the need for a public sector pay rise. And please continue to support the pay protests as they happen in the run-up to the next stage of our pay campaign. And our commitment is we will continue to update you regularly on what's going on that and the compensation scheme. So thank you very much.